Hello and welcome back to the Pause, Purpose, Play podcast with me, your host, Michaela Thomas. In today's episode with Holly, we go to some dark places, but I hope that it's not dark, but more inspirational. We talk about courage over confidence. We talk about how we need to take that self-critical voice with us along for the ride to have a go at things, giving something our best shot, because if you don't ask, you don't get. Holly shares her Geordie philosophy around that in this episode of how we do need to put ourselves out there. We do need to be brave and find that bravery over confidence in order to get things that we want. To dare to be rebellious enough to go against the grain and embrace the ADHD brain that we have if we are ADHD. But it's really important to acknowledge that this episode is for all of you who are perfectionistic, who put a lot of pressure on yourselves, have high expectations of how you want to be. Maybe you're mean to yourself when you don't reach those standards. Maybe you're highly self-critical. Maybe you feel ashamed of who you are. Maybe you think you're a bit weird. Whatever it is that's affecting you, maybe ADHD or not, this episode will feel inspirational to you. It will feel like you got some new mantras to hold on to. So listen to this episode to hear some of the things that helped Holly get through the really deep, dark, horrible place of grief and how she's managed being an actress in the public eye. So Holly Matthews is a former TV actress, a self-development coach and founder of the Happy Me Project. Holly's TED Talk has been watched by 500,000 people, and she's appeared on Lorraine, BBC, ITV, Talk Radio, Channel 5 News, and featured in the Daily Mail, Mirror, The Sun, Closer, Hello, Psychology's Magazine, Spirit, and Destiny, and Prima Magazine. As you hear me speaking, there's a lot of resume here, right? The Happy Me Project boasts 2 sellout workshop tours across the UK and more recently sellout Restival events, which is a positive mindset festival event with guest speakers, activities, and the punchy Happy Me vibe running throughout. So her Happy Me project has a focus on simplifying self-development and takes the fancy out of positive thinking. She's not about toxic positivity though, as you'll hear in this episode. Holly is neurodivergent and has been diagnosed with ADHD, which informs much of her work. She was nominated for a Diversity Award for her work and the accessibility she aims to create for people across all brain types. She has amassed over 60,000 followers across her social media platforms, and she uses this space to vlog and blog about the death of her husband to brain cancer in 2017, which generated huge press interest in her story and allowed her to turn her pain into something positive. You'll hear more about that on this episode when we go to that dark place and hear more about how it was when she lost her soulmate. Holly is a qualified life coach, NLP practitioner, hypnotherapist, intuitive psychology coach, and award-winning author who has coached thousands of people across the world, across all walks of life, from mums on the school run to Brit-winning pop stars. Her debut book, The Happy Me Project, a no-nonsense guide to self-development, won the Health and Wellbeing magazine's Best Wellbeing Book of 2022 and hit #1 on Amazon the day it was released. So you hear all the ambition, you hear all the achievement, but what you will also hear on this episode is Holly's relatable and raw approach to self-development. And she will also teach you how to feel more happy and less crappy in a way that feels a bit more relatable in the sense that her Geordie accent is all over that. Let's dive into this show. I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you, Holly, because not only because you just said, you know, whatever comes out, you're as excited as I am to know what's going to come out, but also because I know that you are very free-spoken and very courageous in the stuff that you share. So very pleased to welcome you onto the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. And I am all about the courageous conversations. My favorite thing in the world is the grey area in life. Although I can be very black and white in some respects and all or nothing, I love the kind of awkwardness of life, the nuance in life, the areas where people feel just a little bit uncomfortable saying. They're the conversations that I want to have because that's what we're thinking. But we often are scared to have those conversations or scared to be bold. And that's one thing I really pride myself on and really challenge myself on as well, to just live with bravery and see where that takes me. And often there are some excellent adventures when I do that. So it does work.
So that living with bravery, I guess that's relating to kind of that sense of courage over confidence that sometimes we just have to have a go.
Yeah. I mean, I really, if I look back on my life, so starting in TV, my first job that I got, I was 11 and I got that job. And I still say this now, I still get work in the same way. That hasn't changed from this same, where I was at, 10, 11 years old. And at that age, I wrote a letter to the TV show. So it was a kids' TV show in the Northeast. I wrote them a letter and they came back to me. They did used to get young kids from normal backgrounds, kids who hadn't had a leg up or went to drama school or, from stage school background. They just got normal kids from normal schools. And so they did do that, but they got me in for auditions. And it's hilarious because this letter that I got, my parents put on it, they found it somehow on the family computer, which I was actually surprised we had a computer at the time. It was the 90s, but apparently we did. I mean, it must have been fairly basic. But they found this letter that I wrote. They put it on a canvas for me for my 30th birthday. And I've got it somewhere. It's hilarious. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's living bold. And my first thing that I say, my name is Holly and I am an actress. Like there's no, there was no concern, that there was no, humble mumble of what I was. I am an actress, just affirming it. And then I go on in this letter to say, I've got brown hair and green eyes, and I've done that in brown and green, just to let them know, and a bit visual for them. And I say to them, I've done drama classes at my Saturday morning drama class, and I'm not shy one bit. I just letting them know that I wasn't shy. And I would love a part on the show. And then at the very bottom, I've just put, P.S., please write back quickly, because I was just dead keen to get a response. And that is how I got my first job. I mean, I did about 6 auditions, didn't get the part. Then they wrote a part in for me. I wasn't suited for that part. But I look at that and I think I was young to have done that. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to have come from a family that are very direct. We shout loud, we laugh loud, we talk, we debate. And my mom and dad and my sister was very encouraging, and my parents always just believed in doing whatever you want to do and following your passion. And, having not come from money, they always wanted more for me, and they wanted me to be bold and live and travel and do things and not be scared. And I was really lucky that I had that upbringing. And it gave me that kind of springboard to be as bold as that. But I look back and I think, and I've considered this a lot, I've done plenty business courses, being a business owner, which are very strategic and very not suited to our ADHD brains, because I just want to rebel against everything they tell me. And I look back and I realize, and even more so this year again, reassessing new stage of business. And I'm like, what works? What works is not always having a plan and being bold and being brazen and audacious in the things that you're doing. And so this year particularly, I've been very much tapping back into that 11-year-old self and going, she was just giving it a shot, and she believed in herself enough to go for gold. And you know what? A lot of the time, because others don't do that, it works. You get the opportunity, because people can almost not believe that you were bold enough to ask. And there's something, linked in terms of confidence to that behaving with that level of confidence, I guess, or bravery, a moment of bravery, also has the benefit of making other people think, well, they must be confident if they have done this, which in their mind equals they're good at what they do. They must be good at what they do. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But it certainly gives you better opportunities by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just had a conversation about that before we started recording, didn't we? About, how did we get on that podcast, and, both sharing that we just DM'd the host. And
yeah,
for those who are listening, I talk about don't ask, don't get. So if you don't ask for something, if you don't dare to receive the thing that you want,
Absolutely.
it's not going to come your way. So you have to ask or you won't get it.
In Newcastle, where I'm from, we have a Geordie saying, so Geordie's from Newcastle. And our saying is based on that, and it's shy bairns getting out. So shy bairns getting out simply means bairns being children in Geordie dialect. And shy bairns getting out is exactly what I was taught as a kid. Shy bairns getting out. And another saying that used to come up a lot was my granddad, Matt the cat. He was a big character in Newcastle, Matt the cat. And I still get people mention Matt the cat to me. And Matt the cat used to say, grasp the nettle. Just grasp the nettle, be brave enough, be bold enough to grasp the nettle, because when you do, it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, and good things happen. So I always have those things, and I think you're absolutely right. And people worry that if you ask, there'll be a rejection, that you'll get a no. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but actually by getting those no's, one, you build a level of immunity to that. And as an actor, listen, if you're in the acting world, you've had more rejections in 1 week than most people have had in their entire working life. Yes. So you get very comfortable with the no. But alongside that, actually, the reality is there are huge wins by doing that. We assume we're going to get the no, but actually just by being bolder than most people, you've already eliminated some of the competition by asking, because most people don't. They're not asking, they're waiting for the opportunity to fall in their lap, and it won't. It just won't.
It just won't. And taking that opportunity to ourselves with the self-doubt along for the ride is some of the things I teach people, because they think,
yes,
someone said to me, I will give myself these opportunities. I just need the negative self-talk to stop first. And I was like, that's not going to happen. This negative self-talk is on for the ride. It's along for the ride.
Yeah.
In this moment.
That mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this moment, I was even thinking, oh, this is such a good nugget. I should write this down. So I know it, like around 6 minutes in, Holly said an amazing thing. And then I will forget that later on. And then as we're speaking, I'm having this parallel processing inside my mind, watching the content as it's emerging, because that's how the ADHD brain works, right?
Yeah.
And then that thought is gone. And then the self-critical thought can come in, like, why won't you just write it down? Where is your stylus pen? Have you forgot where your stylus pen is? Why can't you write it on the screen?
Yeah.
You can't take out a piece of paper now because that's going to be too rustly. And then we go, all right.
Yeah. But you're right.
It's just stuff.
And that's, if we, as ADHD people, we tend to have more noise than the average neurotypical person.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that a neurotypical person won't experience that. Of course they will. It'll just be a different version of it, right? I heard somebody recently, I don't know where I heard it, but I'm totally stealing it off somebody else, not my idea. But I heard somebody talking about neurotypical versus neurodivergent minds. And they just said, it's almost like working on a different operating system. So it's more like, Samsung or iPhone. We got one person, processing in this way and one the other way. And that's how I see it. So the busy brain, that the way you describe, I understand that. I live that kind of version of it. But a neurotypical person will have their version of it. And I just love the idea. And I think this works in a lot of areas of struggle for us, is bringing it along to the right, not waiting for it to not be there, because that might never happen. But actually, we silence that noise by firstly giving ourselves a ton of compassion, which we know. Shame, nobody moved anywhere from a place of shame. That doesn't work. If shame worked, my house would be tidy and I'd be good at maths, right? Shame doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we have to be compassionate to ourselves, but also just appreciating that, that noise that you just said there, that has an important factor, doesn't it? That is our brain's way of, keeping us safe. And it's not, if we didn't have it, there would be something else going on that would be needing some support there as well. So I think you're right. Once we can embrace and acknowledge it, that doesn't mean not trying to find kinder language. I often say like self-editing in the moment. So sometimes I will hear myself doing that where, and again, this can be very typically ADHD or neurodivergent, because we've had such negative messaging for some of our symptoms of what we experience, that we take on that. I often say it's like taking on the baton that somebody else not physically beat us with, but mentally beat us with, we take that on. We go, okay, I'll take that. Then I'll tell myself I'm rubbish at this and that, and I'm lazy or stupid or not good enough. But now what I do, because I still experience that every day, I still experience it, still comes with me on the podcast, comes with me on stages, on when I'm doing really big stuff where people think, wow, she must be so confident all of the time with none of the noise I have. No, I do. It's all there. But what I do try to do is in the moment recognize, is there a way that I can just either reframe or soften the language a bit and just notice it and recognize, that's my brain's way of saying, don't do anything, just stay still. Don't have anything where you could be rejected. It's a safety mechanism. So if I can recognize that in the moment, I can see the benefit and the absurdity of it. And then I can usually now, at the very least, most of the time, obviously not your worst days, sometimes we take a little longer, but a lot of the time I can self-edit the language that I'm using. And I don't go for perfection or the opposite. I just go for, can I be kinder to myself in this moment? What would be just a tiny bit nicer to say to myself in this moment than you're a terrible human being who doesn't adult well? Like that. And in noticing the words you say to yourself on repeat is so important in this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're on the receiving end as well as the person giving it. So I love the research around how the level of adrenaline and cortisol goes up when we're self-criticized, because when we're not just receiving it, it's actually being bullied and being rejected, but we're also the aggressor. We're also the bully. Yeah. So that gives us more adrenaline and cortisol because it's actually, we're being harsh towards ourselves and we're receiving that harshness. So, picking up that baton, like you said, or the shit stick to beat ourselves with. We already agreed I wasn't going to swear, but here we are. That's that internalized self-criticism. I see that a lot in perfectionists where they've had really high standards put on them when they were young, and then they've internalized those high standards. They've received the criticism, so now they criticize themselves, or even outwardly directing it to others as well. So that's why we can then struggle in our relationships.
That's so interesting.
Demand a lot from others.
Yeah, that's so interesting in terms of, and the adrenaline side of things. I hadn't thought about this like that. I mean, it is an internal battle, right? It's literal that back and forth. And what you said there about the perfectionism thing, and just made me think of, being successful from a young age. So having a success from 11 years old, it puts you on a level of a pedestal, and there feels like there's an expectation. And I think it was Mel Robbins do a live coaching session once, and what she said stuck with me. It made me laugh. She had a woman on there who had been essentially pitted as a genius as a child. She'd been putting all the, moved up a year and whatever, and doing a university degree when she was in primary school, something like that, really super smart. And she was explaining this, and then she was talking about, how she had plateaued, how she just couldn't get her life together. And she was at that stuck feeling that we often meet people at. And Mel Robbins said, when she described being a genius, Mel Robbins said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And it really made me laugh because I really understood that the level of expectation when you have some successes or you work extremely hard internally to get to something. And a lot of the people that you will work with and that will listen to this podcast, being ADHD and high achieving, sits you in that space of such heightened anxiety because it's taking more to get to that point. And I saw a documentary about ADHD once that had a study of rats. I mean, I don't know how they make that. Rats have ADHD, but whatever, they do. And so they had these, like a neurotypical rat and an ADHD rat. And the explanation of this experiment couldn't have described my lived experience more, in that they both had this same track to go and get a piece of food. And they watched the ADHD rat go probably 10x the speed of the neurotypical, but they were trying to jump off and go up, and they were falling, and they'd make a mistake. But they got the, let's say it's a piece of cheese, I'm sure it wasn't, piece of cheese, they'd got it at the same time as the neurotypical, but they had burnt themselves out so hard getting there because they were trying to do it in this different fashion. And I was like, that's our lived experience, and especially high achieving women, particularly because we get lost in all of this system. That's what we do. So I think we get to a point of probably midlife and upwards where we're so exhausted and burnt out from doing that. We're really anxious. And then perhaps some of us will, some people then get their diagnosis of ADHD and it's very hard for those around them to maybe understand it because they haven't seen it. What they saw was the perfectionist behavior, that people-pleasing, workaholic, all of those things that we've probably experienced. And then we get to this point, and I don't know if you experienced this at all, but when I was diagnosed officially, I started to work with my brain more. I was starting to be kinder to myself. I was starting to allow myself to not do the anxiety-driven behaviors of trying to look neurotypical and behave in a neurotypical way, which we do. I stopped doing it. And what I got from the rest of the world was you're performing more ADHD. So the rest of the world assumed my performance was the ADHD behavior when the opposite was true. My performance, my cosplaying as a neurotypical person that I had been doing for so long, that was the performance. And internally, I had to deal with that. So when we learn about our brains, whatever the diagnosis is, whether it's ADHD or it's anxiety or whatever else, we learn and we start to essentially pass back the anxiety. So I, over the last, 6 years or whatever, just went, it's not mine. And then everybody else gets annoyed by the behavior. And I'm doing my very best to manage that. But I feel less anxious because I'm not pretending that it is any other way than it is. And so it's nicer.
It's much nicer because it's that permission piece of surrendering into, this is who I am. This is how my brain is wired. This is what I need to be well. This is what I need to be excited. This is what lights a spark in me. And that means sometimes having conversations where, like, some of my friends that I almost, sit down to have a conversation and go, right, I need to just let you know that there are 5 bullet points that I want to talk about today. These are the 5 things I want to talk about. And then we kind of go, okay, now I've done a brain dump. But part of that is really understanding 2 things about yourself. What is the support I need and what are the systems that will help me thrive? The support and the systems. Those are the 2 key words I've given myself in my business this year. And really utilizing things like access to work, which we were having a good little rant about just before we started recording. So let's put a pin in that and come back to that in a minute. But I think that letting yourself be your authentic self, your true self, the person you are with the brain wiring you have, that unmasking is really, really vulnerable and courageous. And sometimes we get that backdraft, as self-compassion researcher Kristen Neff talks about, that when we start to set boundaries, when we start to say, this is my experience, this is what I need, the surroundings around us can then say, well, no, you can't have that. You've always been doing this thing, the people pleasing you've always been doing. You've always been the perfect little girl. When we start to rebel, and I love that you used that word in the beginning, I just want to rebel against all of that. When we start to rebel and fall more into that true ADHD-ness, sometimes people don't like it and we get backdraft.
Yeah. Well, I often say to people that I work with, you can set boundaries or you can people please, but you can't have both. You can't have both, because when and you're right, once we stop behaving in a way that people expect, and often that's when we're not doing things for people that we were, we're not spinning ourselves out, we will get a backlash as such. Anyone that's, anyone that is just beginning their journey in terms of self-development and healing and all of that stuff, I guarantee you will lose some people along the way. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. I don't want it to think like you've got to, I'm not one of those coaches, call all negative people from your life or anything like that, because those people teach us things. And sometimes those are people that we love, and we just have to put boundaries in for some of those people. But I think it's important to recognize the right people. If you want to have really connected relationships and really feel good in your life, they have to see the chaos. And I will often, I lean into who I am more every day. And I have my own litmus tests that will be my judge of whether somebody can really be close to me. That's not and it's not a judgment of anyone that can't, because we are all suited to different people, and that's okay. Lots of people won't like me at all, and that's fine. I'm comfortable with that. And, jokes aside about swearing, sometimes swearing is my litmus test, that I will go into a room, and if I swear and the room recoils, it's not my room. And I don't judge that room. I'm not thinking, oh, you proved you can't have a conversation. I just think, that's okay. But if you can't hold space for that, I promise you can't hold space for any of my chaos. You can't. And I think the more we do that, we think, because initially we might have that loss of, the shedding of the people, we think that's a bad thing. But actually, what's really going to happen as you lean into that is you're going to attract really connected relationships, and they're not meeting the performative version. They're meeting you. They're meeting you in your chaos, in your mess. And those relationships are magic. Those relationships are beautiful. And they're relationships that don't have to have the work that we might have put into, being this version of us that we think we have to be. These are special relationships.
Yeah, because there's less of that mental effort to think about, what am I doing? Am I being liked? Am I being accepted? Am I being appreciated? Am I being judged? All of the stuff that we know that we have, the overthinking propensity from the negativity bias we have. And this is obviously not exclusive to just ADHD women. You can be perfectionistic as hell and still not be ADHD. You can be a people pleaser and not be ADHD. So it's just, for anyone who's listening and like, oh, they're all just going on about ADHD, it's because half my caseload, at least, of clients who come my way now are late diagnosed women with ADHD. So we're discovering this more and more, and that these two patterns of people pleasing, perfectionism, and I want to add another P, which is procrastination. Those three things have been hiding your difficulties for a really long time. So no, not everyone who's a perfectionist is ADHD, but there's a good proportion of them, because perfectionism is a super useful safety keeping mechanism. Much like you said, anxiety or self-criticism, all of it is aimed at keeping us safe from rejection, from ridicule, from humiliation and criticism and judgment from others. So I'm wondering also, as someone who's been in the public eye for such a long time, it's not just that our inner critic says, oh, what if they won't like you? What if they will criticize you? You must have also experienced actual criticism or rejection, like you said about, getting the rejections from auditions, etc. How have you coped with that without knowing about the RSD, the rejection sensitivity dysphoria of your brain?
Oh, I mean, I was, as we all were late diagnosed people, I was a feral ADHD person who was just feeling my way through it. I do not think for any minute that me becoming an actor was an accident. I think it was masking it was perfectionism for masking. I wanted to be so good at being a neurotypical person. I literally became an actor and learned a script that worked and it was tip top. It was great. I did Holly. It served me very well. But and hilariously, and I only remembered this recently, my first acting class that I went to was called Sit and Fidget, which I had forgotten the name. Sit and Fidget. And I now realize that was the name of it, which is hilarious. But in that world, firstly, that world is a really safe space for neurodivergent people because it's littered with them. So I would say the majority, I'm going to say there must be like 90% of people in the entertainment industry, which is why there's I guess from people's eyes and, online and stuff like that, people think everybody's got autism, ADHD these days. I actually think a really high percentage of business owners and entertainers do. And that makes sense because they do something in a different way, which creates some interest and, a different business. So it makes sense. It doesn't mean that everybody is those things. It's just that you see those people in your face because they're entertainers or athletes and that's been their way of coping. So for me, I think I always knew I was different. I always knew. I knew, and I put it down to, and people would say, well, she's one of them, actors, creative types, that kind of thing. But growing up on television, I now understand, because I struggled massively with how I looked, and I was hugely body dysmorphic as a teenager. And, I guess I very much understand. My daughter's 11 and 13, and my oldest is autistic. And she's very similar to me as a child, which is so fascinating because I'm not necessarily similar to me now as a child. It's very genetic based, and it's interesting to see, but she's really focused on the way that she looks, and it's very perfectionist behavior, as was mine. And I thought at that age that I would go out into the street and people would just collapse in horror at how ugly I was, which was obviously not true, but it was so intense for me that, 6 months of every year for 7 years, while I was in those formative years of growing up, I was in front of a makeup artist who was correcting my face. And then that would go out on television for the rest of the 6 months of the year. And everybody would comment on who I was, what I was doing, my face. So looking back, I can understand how I got there. And I also started doing self-development at a really young age, in a time when we had no access to anything but the library, where I used to get out Paul McKenna's Hypnosis. I was going to say CDs, but it might have even been tapes. And I used to meditate. And my parents were like, who is this hippie child she's so weird. They were lovely about it, but my dad was a welder and my mum worked in a bank. So they were like, what is she doing? And I'd be writing down my negative thoughts and just burning them in the garden and stuff. Loads of witchy stuff that actually now I realize you actually were doing some really good stuff and you were helping yourself through it. So I think I always had an awareness of eyes on, and essentially my whole life, there's been a platform from that age on some level, whether it was TV or singing. I sang to Sony at 18, 19. Then I was doing acting again in the self-development space that's still online. And so I very much understand younger people who now all of their lives are on social media, on this platform. I learned early days, it was horrific when I would get, awful comments, and I found it really difficult. I think one thing that was really useful for me was I was really ambitious and I really wanted to be an actor. And so from a young age, people would say, you're going to have to toughen up. You're going to have to get a thick skin. Acting's a tough industry. So I developed that. And because I guess when we talk about having a purpose or finding a reason or a meaning behind something difficult, that pushes us through. So my meaning was, I want to be an actor, and really that's like my main focus, so I can get through the rejections of being an actor. I found it much harder to deal with the rejections of me as a person, and I very much grew up seeing myself, not always in a healthy space, as almost like a product. And I was very much, and I forget what it's called, but I was perceiving myself all the time through other people's eyes. So I would know myself, but then I would also see myself as, what characters am I playing? What do I look like? How do I carry? How will other people? I was always reflecting that. And obviously with an ADHD brain, I'm doing that at 10x the speed in every room. And it would make me feel really quite bad. I got better at it as I got older. And I'm now in a really fortunate position that I have worked on my self-esteem so much that nobody's going to tell me that, and I get the obvious stuff online of people will send me messages sometimes. They're not often very negative, to be honest, but I do get them. And I get people will, whether it's the way I look or the things I've said, will say things. I use humor a massive amount, and not humor I don't mean self-deprecating at all. I'm not actually very self-deprecating, other than saying I'm messy, but I think that's just factual. I don't think that's just factual. But I'm not self-deprecating in terms of the way that I look. I don't talk badly about myself. It took me a long time to get there. It was absolutely repetition of that and dragging my brain away from doing that. But now if I get negative comments or feedback, I'm not saying I never listen to that, because there's some feedback that is important to hear. But I always start with the phrase or the word, that's interesting. And in my mind, I think, that's interesting. When someone says something, and I don't attach myself to it, I detach from that thing. And I think, is there any validity in that? Is that something I should look at? But without yes, I do have to look at it because that person said it. I also consider, would I take advice from this person? Is this coming from a space of someone, do I know them? Are they really great in a field that I want to be in? If not, then I don't have anything to say to that. It's no different to me. Someone saying something awful to me that is not with any validity is no different to someone saying to me, Holly's got two heads. No, I don't. No, I haven't. And I think that has come from practice because I wasn't there as a young person. And it's come from, I guess, also going through life as an adult and experiencing, big T trauma and loss and pain. And that makes you realize that the stuff you were worrying about doesn't matter and we're all going to die anyway. So you may as well stop caring what that woman you went to school with said about you, or it literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And they don't pay the bills. And it just, I've kind of just detached from that so much. And when people say things online, I do love, and as an ADHD person, maybe you'll get this, people think they're going to offend me online when they say things. And what they don't realize is my favorite ADHD pastime, my favorite toxic ADHD pastime is to argue with strangers on the internet. And it gives me dopamine. So when I recently went on the ADHD Chatter podcast, as we were sharing, and
with Alex Partridge, who I'm hoping to get onto this podcast very soon.
Oh my God, yeah, definitely get him on. He's a great guy. And so I went on the podcast and the clip that he used was me talking about how I forget to speak to my friends. I forget they exist. I love them with my whole heart and existence, but I forget they exist. And it was a short clip from a larger thing. It went hugely viral. I mean, it's being watched by about 4 million people or something wild. So there's constant streaming of stuff. And people, most of them are quite positive or get it or, oh my God, that's me. But the odd one has just been so negative. But I'm like, what people don't realize is as an ADHD person, I'm just like, let's go.
You're just getting ready for battle, basically.
I'm just ready. I'm ready to be hilarious is what I'm ready to be. And that's my way of, working through that. Because I know we hear this a lot and I hope it does still land for people because it does with me and I think about it a lot. What people think about you is none of your business. You literally can't control it. Like every room you walk into, you will get people that like you, people that don't, and they're filtering it through their own lived experience. You cannot control that. They've lived a whole life without you. So if we manage to find some people in this world that think we're all right, that's great. And it's also probably a fluke a bit as well.
Yeah. And I mean, to be able to match up with people who tolerate who you are. I said that on a long bus trip once when I was going to a compassion retreat. And I had a fellow psychologist who was really interested in the book I was writing, which is my first book, The Lasting Connection. It's about developing love and compassion for yourself and your partner. They were like, so give me some tips then. I was really jet lagged and now obviously know that I was quite flippant in nature because that's that flippant rebellion part of ADHD. I was like, we've talked now for 2 hours. I'm getting a bit. Ugh. And she was lovely. So it wasn't a her problem. It was my brain is now getting flippant problem.
Yeah.
So she said, so what is the secret then? Well, how do you have a lasting connection then? Because she was currently single. And I was like, basically, if you own your own shit, you can tolerate your partner's shit, you got a pretty good start. And then I was like, need to sleep now. But sometimes some of those sparks of genius, and I don't mean genius as in the example you gave of absolute IQ brilliance, but sometimes the sparks that we get from the ADHD brain, we need to harness that. I did put that in the book. I rewrote it something slightly more eloquently, but the beauty of kind of leaning into the brain that we have and the people who we connect with, when we can own and tolerate our own shit and do that for other people as well. It's not just the romantic partnerships that are beautiful and magical then. It's also all of our friendships that are so much more solidly about belonging and not just being performative, playing that role, reading that script, because they will never truly get to know who we are then. And authenticity and vulnerability feeds connection. We know that from the perfectionism research. So the fact that you've done this slowly, gradually over the years, from, the young age witching of burning stuff and self-hypnosis to the grown-up version of that, of being a hypnotherapist, being a coach, being an author. I wonder if we can also think about, that's not been a linear process for you.
No.
You've been through a lot. And I wonder if we can think a little bit about how the loss of your husband has shaped you. Are you okay to talk about that?
Of course. Yeah, of course. So my husband Ross died of brain cancer. in 2017. He'd had brain cancer for 3.5 years before he then died of it. Ross was autistic as well, which is interesting because he was diagnosed at 26 and missed this kind of new wave of understanding, but was very much like owned it completely and was really happy when he got a diagnosis because it made more sense, like we all probably are when we do get that diagnosis. When Ross died, Ross and I were so connected, like really, really. We met, I was actually with somebody else at the time for 6 years, had a dog and a mortgage, and was completely out of my value system to cheat on somebody, or like it was not in my brain. The relationship had emotionally ended, and it was one of those, I was still really quite young in reality. I thought I was grown, but I wasn't, not really, at like my early 20s. And I met Ross on a job for Pims, a drink. I used to do like promotional work outside of acting, and we met on that job. Neither of us were really supposed to be on that job. We didn't know each other from Adam. We met each other and there was an instant connection. And the connection, if I look back on this now, was both of us being very direct, very honest, very raw in our approach to things, brutally honest. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, we were able to see each other so quickly. We could see it wasn't that surface level stuff. We met, knew there was something there. The next day I got the bus to Coventry, left my partner of the time, and just didn't really come back. And we had two kids together. When we spent most of he had his own business. He did property and ran his own football teamwear business. And so we were very lucky in that we created a life that worked around who we were. And when we had the kids, we worked around the kids, and we both worked for ourselves. We both supported each other. We laughed a lot. We spent most of our time pottering around, drinking cups of tea and coming up with some kind of plan of something we were going to do, something we were going to sell or do or whatever. Always on some new idea. And so for me, when Ross was at his end of life stage, and with brain cancer, it's different because you lose them before you lose them, because their brain goes, much like dementia and things like that. And when we knew we were at that stage in 2017 and Ross went into a hospice, I had to, it was instantly hard for me in that we did everything together. Like it wasn't, and it wasn't like a jealous relationship in the slightest or anything. We just really enjoyed each other's company. We spent a lot of time together. His mates would often, his name was Ross, and his mates would call us Ronnie, because we just potted around together and we matched each other and we debated and we laughed. And so when Ross was dying and when Ross died, it was, I sat in the hospice, meditating on acceptance and really acknowledging the process of death. I don't know how to explain that in any other way. I knew Ross would have valued this as well, as an autistic guy who wasn't religious and very direct. And I almost kept thinking he would like the process of this. He would be interested in what scientifically is happening here as Ross died, which is a weird thought, I guess, but not really in our relationship. That would have made sense to have said that to Ross. And I wanted to be in that moment of death and experience it in the way we experience a birth, or it's part of life. And I wanted to be there with Ross as he went through his end of life. I didn't want to miss anything. In fact, that was quite hard because I literally didn't want to move because it felt really wrong to miss his death. I mean, I know we are often late for things as ADHD people, but I feel like that would be really quite rude to be late for that. I can't miss that one. And the minute that Ross died, it was also very much eyes on. It was in every national newspaper and front pages. And it was, I have to say, that was a level of intrusion that I had not experienced to that point. Paparazzi at the funeral, and it was a lot. It was a lot, and there was so much noise. In some ways, there was a benefit to that because I was then also able to, I never had to tell anybody, which was a nice benefit at the beginning. Never had to do that. But it was also very heightened because there was so many eyes on. But for me, it was instantly, my mate wasn't there. Like instantly he wasn't there. And because we were together all the time, there was always that person. And especially, I think one of the things I found really difficult as an ADHD person as well, and because we had created this life that worked and we balanced each other out very well. With him being autistic, he was very much he would do the boring stuff I didn't want to do, and I would drag him out quicker to do fun things. And we balanced each other so well that when he wasn't there and there wasn't that person to bounce that thought off, I instantly went back to, and it's something I really only recently kind of understood and grasped. I lost a little bit of confidence initially. And I think that was because I went back to feeling like an alien again. I went back to not having that person that understood my weird, understood all of the ways that we just were talking about. You know, when somebody can meet you there, that's a level of connection that is really special. And in fact, when Ross was about to have his second brain surgery, we had a conversation. It was 8 years into our relationship. And Ross said, it won't seem enough on paper. It won't seem enough as to what we've had. People, you know, they could have 50 years together, but they might not have had that level of connection or time together. I mean, we literally were together nearly every single day we were together. And so for me, when Ross wasn't there was a feeling of obvious loneliness is an obvious one in that, but also in that identity side of things for me, that I felt like I've gone back to this place in the world where I'm weird again. And I know that's not true. And I obviously have worked on that. But that initial feeling of the person that understands this isn't there. And that was instant for me. And, you know, the one thing I really did set myself the mindset of was when we were going in, there was loads of eyes on, and I had that feeling of, you know, understanding how other people were perceiving me, and all of that was coming up for me again. You know, how am I supposed to grieve? And I remember a really clear message, an intuitive message coming up for me, which was just, you have not done your life in any way the standard, how people think you should do it. So why the hell do you think that you're going to grieve and be a widow in the way that people think you should do that? Don't do that. Don't try to perform as a widow or griever or how people think. Just do what you need to do to get through this and embrace whatever comes. If you have a breakdown, you have a breakdown. If you laugh. If you cry. Like, allow all to come. And I think by doing that, and also knowing who me and Ross were as a couple, which was super direct, no conversations, not had, I think that really helped me. And to really be very, very protective of my space and know that people say ridiculous things when you're grieving, and they put their own interpretation of it, their own version of what they believe about an afterlife or don't. And I've had to tune out a lot of that noise. And for me and my daughters, just go, we're going to work our way through this and we'll do it in our own way. And that seems to have worked. And with the kids, keeping conversation flowing and allowing them to ask any questions that they have, there being no questions that are out of bounds. And that has meant that I've cried my eyes out at some of the questions because they've been brutal. But equally, I never want them. And I spoke to lots of adults who lost parents, and I asked them, what was bad? What didn't help? How can I get my girls through this? And one of the major things that came up was nobody talked about it.
Yes.
Nobody let, and one other thing was that they didn't cry in front of them. And I still cry, you know, grief comes up for you. I'll still cry in front of them. And I will say, I had a really grief day today. Like, this came up and it hurt me, and I cried about this because, you know, people say kids are so resilient, which is such crap. Kids are as resilient as we are as adults. They're the same. Humans are resilient, sure. But equally, they feel the same things that we do. They're not like, they will perform more for adults if they think it's going to upset the adult in their world. But I never wanted my kids to do that. I want them to ask, and you know, it's a process. We will still, as the girls get older, they're sometimes acknowledging more now, and also his presence is missed. And there's also a sadness in that they sometimes can't remember things, and that's tough. But we've done it in the chaotic way that I often do everything, with passion and love, and we've not got it right lots of the time, and there's definitely been too much shouting and stress some of the time. But I go with compassion. We've never done it before. I've never been a widow before. I've never done this before. And, you know, at 32, when I became a widow with 2 kids and businesses, and I think I did all right. And that's all we could do.
Well, that's the thing. You can't do these things perfectly because you've never done them before. And like we said earlier on in the conversation, it reminds me of this quote I often use by Wayne Gretzky of, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And that kind of works for an ice hockey player, but also works for us, like seizing opportunities. And that opportunity that, like in the deepest, darkest grief of losing effectively your soulmate, the father of your children, your mate, actually in that moment to realize that I can do things the way I need to do them. This is not the opportunity to perform. This is the opportunity to actually grieve in a self-compassionate way. I think that's a lot. That's a lot to take on when there were eyes on, when there were people watching. And as I was listening, I was just struck by how much sadness there is there and how easy it is for compassion to be mistaken for pity. That I'm sure you've had lots of pitying comments over the years as well, but that's not compassion. Because compassion means that we have to sit with the deep, dark beast, the monster that is grief. We have to feel, what would that feel like? What would I feel like if my husband died? And I sat with that in this moment. I was like, that is hard. And compassion is then the strong, courageous choice to invite all the darkness in and say, wow, that's really hard. So I love the work that they've done with, you know, that they would do around sort of compassion for pain, that actually pity is a weak choice. Compassion is a strong one.
Ooh, love that. That's really interesting. Pity is not the only time I use pity as a tool, and this has to, and it is a negative tool, I guess, in many respects. The only time I use it is when I'm trying to diffuse somebody's negative behavior and not get rageful about it and not sit in that space. But I might have to deal with that person. Sometimes I have to use pity then, and I use it as I really feel sad for them that they're in that headspace, that they have to behave like that. That's the only time. I don't think in grief, there's literally nothing worse. There's nothing I want less than somebody to pity me. And especially if you're a strong, ambitious person, I don't want you to pity me. That sits me in such a disempowering space. And of course, some people will do that. And then when I behave, I mean, I think a lot of people thought, and probably still do, maybe she's faking it. But I try to openly, say, I've cried, I've been in dark places. None of this is performative. And in fact, one thing I really did was I reminded myself, I had to realize that to go into this next stage, I had to let down some barriers, and that armor that I had built up, which had served me well in, from being young and dealing with being the kid on the telly, and then as an actor, and boom, boom, we build these barriers up that protect us. And I felt I had to remind myself I wasn't in a fight. And especially when you're dealing with ill health and cancer and caring for somebody and all of those things, you are in a fight. You're in a literal fight. And also I forget sometimes that the kids were so young. There was 3 and 1 when Ross was diagnosed. I forget how, now I'm like, how did we do that? I don't know how I did that at that time. Brain surgeries and radiotherapy and chemo. And I think we almost forget the detail. And as you say, sitting with that, I was talking to my oldest daughter about this, because she said when she says her dad's dead, obviously children can't really grasp that if they've not experienced that. And one of her friends was doing the comparing thing, and it was something that was a little less than, the experience wise. And I said to my daughter, and I didn't mean this in an uncompassionate way to the girl who was sharing her own difficulty, I don't do top trumps on sadness. We experience pain at our own level. But there was a reason for this. I said, sometimes people do need a leveler, and they do need some understanding of what you've actually experienced. And she talked through with her friend the detail of what that means. So not just the words, my dad died, which is quite a sanitized version of what happened. In the same way, when I say my husband died, people can compartmentalize that as one thing that happened, when there was a lot of trauma around that even I probably haven't scratched the surface of yet. There are lots of experiences that have been pushed away in parts of my brain that no doubt I will discuss in therapy at some point. But and I certainly don't, I think you do it in a process. So I'm fine with that. But I think, when we're trying to be kind to people who are experiencing grief, I do think sometimes we have to just let it in. And that's really scary to do. But in order to do that, that's where real compassion and the real words of compassion come from, not the kind of tropes that we reel out when someone's gone through something difficult.
But it's that thing that there are no words. There are just no words that can make it better. I just think of, there's nothing I can say in this moment. There's just presence. I can be here, but without that lived experience, I can't offer anything. But that's not what compassion looks like, because that's that sense of, I need to fix this. How can you fix someone's grief?
Yeah.
You can't. And it will never go away. It will show up in different ways and different versions of it. And like you said, you had 2 young children when he was diagnosed, a 1-year-old and 3-year-old. Sometimes we then just bury all of that grief and that sadness, that worry, that fear, that trauma, because we just have to continue to function. And that's something that I often see, that we can have that delayed response to something that's very traumatic, and suddenly, bam, it comes out somewhere else. Yeah. Because the body does keep that score of everything traumatic that's happened to us. So it's a mindful, but I love that you're taking yourself to these courageous conversations, that it's fueling your passion and your purpose, knowing that the excitability of the ADHD brain means we can be very passionate, we can do amazing things, even with the self-doubt along for the ride, even with the negative self-talk.
Yeah.
I mean, when I walked out on the stage and won that Inspirational Modern Woman of the Year award this year, a few weeks ago, I was bricking it. I absolutely was. And I was like, what should I say? What should I say? What should I say? And I just, I had my rainbow nails and, off I went.
Rainbow nails.
Thank you. It's matched my rainbow dress. And I thought, in that moment of actually unmasking a bit and sharing my passion for how neurodivergence has that intersectionality with mental health. Actually, I get like a 1 minute on a platform. I don't have a big platform like you. I get 1 minute. How do I make a difference with it? And that to me is always talking about the darkness. I always have to go to the darkness place. So I said, if there's anyone here in this audience, if we know that the 1 in 4 have mental health difficulties. If there's any of you here today listening who's actually going to go and talk to someone, then I've done something to make a difference. That's why I chose. I could have said thank you to this and this person, but I didn't. I took the opportunity.
Yeah, because that's your purpose. And I think that's for me the same. Like, what runs through me always, and more so since Ross died, is, and it's a silly little thing that is in my head, but, brain worm of ADHD is never leave a man behind. And that's how I feel about it. Like, I feel like it's not enough for me to have these tools and to be happy. I need to find ways to help others to find their own, whatever that looks like. I say my job is to teach people to feel more happy and less crappy. And that doesn't mean it's not toxic positivity. It's acknowledging the pain, bringing the pain with you, like we've said, and finding your route through it. Like, one thing that Ross and I would say together, we always said, whatever it takes, was always a kind of affirmation, a mantra. Whatever it takes, find a way. I'll find a way. And that's one thing that I really value and thank my brain for, because I will find a way. There'll be a way. There's a way around it. And I think if anyone wants to steal that affirmation, it's a really nice thing to say to your brain when your brain is going, I don't know what to do, I'm so stuck. I'll find a way. Just keep saying that to yourself till you do. And your brain has a really, really brilliant way of being able to find a way.
Yeah, it does. The resourcefulness of humanity is remarkable, really. The things that we've done and the meaning we've found in even the darkest places. I love the phrase of, whatever happens, I will deal with it.
Love,
because
exactly
I will.
Same mindset. Yeah, absolutely.
We absolutely will. So thank you so much, Holly, for sharing this. And it obviously makes so much sense of why, the different projects you're involved in, the things you do, the Happy Me project, why actually that makes sense. You want to feel happy, not crappy. And you've known what crappy looks like. So we can go to those dark places. I'm in the weeds
with everybody else. I'm in the weeds. I'm wading through the mud. I get it. And it's why I'm constantly trying to find ways to give people the tools to be able to work it out. It's not one size fits all, but if I can find ways to take the clever stuff that we will learn and make it palatable and understandable for normal people in the world who don't do this stuff, then that's what I will keep doing. And I love it.
Yeah. And that's the bit I love about the analogy around the lotus flower as a symbol and metaphor for compassion, is that the lotus flower, as ugly as it is, that, full of disgusting looking holes, it has to sink deep into the mud to get the nourishment for the mud. And the bit you see, it's lovely, isn't it? The bit you see above the surface, the beautiful head of the lotus flower, that has to come from sinking deep into the mud to grow, and then it will find its way above the surface, and that's the bit you'll see. So we never see all the mud wading, that we do behind the scenes. So that's why I love that you use your platform to share things behind the scene as well, and having a public persona where you're not just being the persona anymore, a public person that is you. So as a final takeaway for the listeners, is there a permission you would like to give them or a pressure you'd like to take off them? What would that be?
Oh, I love that. So if I'm thinking about, okay, what's coming up today is permission to just drop the ball. Permission to drop the ball. We're juggling so much in our lives. Drop it. It'll be there another day. You can pick it up another day. Stop having the expectation on yourself to be and do everything, because we're not enough to do that. And it's a ridiculous expectation. So just drop the ball and go for good enough today. That's okay. Some days we just have to do that. And that means we can excel on another day.
Yeah, I love that, because it facilitates for the uneven performance and uneven energy that is ADHD, and that is being a woman as across our cycle as well. So
yeah,
thank you so much for your time today.
So
I know you're very present on social media. What's your favorite place to hang out where people can connect with you?
So Instagram at I am Holly Matthews, and I'm doing lots of conversations on TikTok, which is also at I am Holly Matthews, around confidence and self-belief on there specifically. So they're the places I hang out the most. So come and say hi and let me know that you've been on this podcast and your takeaways and all of that as well.
Amazing. We'll put the links in the show notes as well, so you can go and check out Holly's books. And you got your next book coming up on confidence as well. So when is that coming out?
It comes out in September. So I'm very excited about that, and I'll be shouting all about it very soon.
Good, because courage over confidence. Thank you so much, Holly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care of me.
Thank you so much for listening to the end of this episode. I am so grateful that all of you are taking the time to listen to these longer guest episodes. I know they take a lot of time, but sometimes we need to get to the deeper, darker, nitty-gritty of things. Not everything we do can be clickbaity and delivered in a fast 30-second reel, right? Well, most of the things I do can't be delivered like that, because I just can't get on with that. I need to get into the deeper. I need to get into the more complex, nuanced version of everything. That's just an affliction that I have as a clinical psychologist, that I don't like doing the clickbaity 10-minute things. But don't worry if the guest episodes are too long for you, or you switched off, or you got bored. That's fine. You know, you're more welcome to play us on double speed if you need to. However, I think Holly and I were speaking quickly enough for you to feel like maybe that was okay to hang on with. And like I said during the episode, if you're not ADHD, that doesn't mean you're no longer welcome here. I just noticed there's a lot of women in my audience are very kind to others and unkind to themselves who are ADHD. And we've used this people pleasing and this perfectionism and this masking and all of these strategies to just be a good girl and not stand out, because then we could be seen as weird. So this is what I do in the ADHD Club, the membership I have with monthly workshops on different themes and topics around ADHD. And this club, I built it for you lost girls who were late diagnosed or late self-identified, who've gone through a lifetime of not understanding yourselves and feeling so much self-criticism and shame because you're being a bit weird. So I think of it being for the weird and the wonderful women who are late diagnosed with ADHD, the lost girls who were not found. I'll put a link to the ADHD Club in the show notes as well. But otherwise you can go to thethomasconnection.co.uk/ADHD Club. For any of you who want these monthly workshops to learn more about the brain that you've got, to have body doubling sessions where you can have some flow and focus and accountability with other women who are also stuck on getting things done because you're distracted by all the bright ideas and the noise in your brain. So come along to thethomasconnection.co.uk/ADHD Club. And until I speak to you next time, do take care of yourself.